Houston Texans training camp gets started later this week. 7 position battles that we need to be paying attention to over the course of training camp. I'm Cody Stoots. We'll get to those here in just a moment. Houston Football is my website. HOUfootball.com is where you can find it. The link is below. I'd appreciate you throwing me a subscribe there and a subscription here on YouTube as well. Let's get into it. 7 position battles for training camp for the Houston Texans. It gets underway on Wednesday, and I cannot wait. I will be live observing in training camp. We'll be tweeting out observations. You'll get the writing on Houston Football, HOUfootball.com, and, of course, observations right here on YouTube. The first position we're going to get into, starting defensive end. Who exactly are the starters at defensive end for this Texans team right now? You would think that Will Anderson is going to ultimately knock down the door and be one of the starters at defensive end for this team. You look at where D'Amico Ryans came from. You look at the investment in the defensive line that they made in San Francisco. And, hey, Baby Bosa out there in San Francisco, he's fantastic. Will Anderson, you hope that he's the same type of player eventually here in Houston for D'Amico Ryans. So I'm kind of reserving one of those spots for Will Anderson. The other spot, it's up for grabs between 2 players, okay? 2 players. Now, again, we're talking about starting defensive end. Now, maybe Dylan Horton down the road, the rookie draft pick out of TCU, could find himself there, and he could certainly be in the rotation right away. But starting opposite what I believe to be Will Anderson is either Jerry Hughes or John Grenard. Now, Jerry Hughes found the fountain of youth last year. He had a fantastic season, 9 sacks after having just 11 sacks the 3 seasons combined before that one. So the fountain of youth for Jerry Hughes was fantastic. If he replicates that, he's the starter opposite Will Anderson, and there's not a lot of questions about it. Now, John Grenard is a fascinating case for this team. Grenard is a guy who had injuries derail last year when there were high expectations for him. It was a step back in the performance. Let's see what Grenard can do with this coaching staff, and this coaching staff's going to get a big benefit of the doubt. We believe that they're a lot better than Lovie Smith's crew. Well, if they are indeed a lot better than Lovie Smith's crew, they should be able to unlock John Grenard's potential, and we can finally see what the SEC saw when Grenard was so fantastic in his final year at Florida. The next position we're going to get to, and this one's going to be tough because there's a lot of contenders. It's the slot wide receiver position. Now, I'm under the assumption that Nico Collins and Robert Woods are your 2 outside guys. And now I know you're saying to yourself, well, Robert Woods has played a lot of slot in his career. And yes, he has played a lot of slot in his career, except for last year when 70% of his snaps and routes run were outside. He played mostly outside last year for Tennessee. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't just immediately bump him inside, but you've got a lot of options inside, and you've got far fewer options outside for this Texans team. So Nico Collins, Robert Woods are the outside guys. Inside, that leaves a smorgasbord of options for this team. The 3 players that are primarily going to be competing for me from the inside spot to be the slot wide receiver are veteran Noah Brown, who was signed as a free agent from the Cowboys, essentially rookie John Mechie. I know he's not technically a rookie, but he missed all of last season through the cancer diagnosis. He's back and should be ready to go for training camp. And then Tank Dell, the rookie draft pick out of Houston. Now, fans will be very familiar with his work, and if you were an AAC fan of another team that wasn't the Cougs, you know how dangerous Tank Dell can be. Those 3 players are going to compete for slot snaps. Brown played a lot in the slot for the Dallas Cowboys last season. And then Mechie and Dell both have a skill set where they can find themselves in that slot as well. I lean initially to Brown, and then I would say Mechie probably after that. If John Mechie is indeed what he showcased at Alabama, he should have the opportunity to play a lot of those slot snaps. It's something to watch and pay attention to. Tank Dell's quickness cannot be ignored. And ultimately, in the grand scheme of this entire offense, San Francisco ran a ton of stuff with their tight ends in the slot position, and Dalton Schultz had been running routes out of the slot for the Cowboys the past couple of seasons. So I would think that we're going to see a lot of Dalton Schultz until somebody clearly takes that slot wide receiver position. 2 positions down, 5 to go here. Hope you're enjoying the video. If you are enjoying the video, please throw me a like, maybe a subscription. Tell your friends. Share it with your friends. Send this to a Texans fan or a Texans hater who doesn't have this type of great content. I appreciate you watching. Starting cornerback opposite Derek Stingley. That's right. Derek Stingley is absolutely a starting cornerback for this team. But who the cornerback opposite Derek Stingley is going to be a fantastic watch in training camp. Steven Nelson returns from last year's team, but of course he's had the very strange offseason. Steven Nelson with some not-so-veiled shots at Nick Caserio, saying that anybody who wears a vest that much could be a clown freak, something of that nature from Nelson. He, of course, has new management, and this is maybe thought to be a ploy to get Nelson a new contract. Nelson didn't show up until he had to show up for the offseason workouts. Let's see what his mood and mentality is here in training camp. If his head's on straight, he's certainly got the opportunity to start opposite Derek Stingley. If his head's not on straight, if he works his way out of favor with the organization, there is an option, a very clear and present option to take his spot. Shaquille Griffin, who was brought over from Jacksonville as a free agent. It was signed after that initial wave of free agents. Griffin was. He talked about how he's healthy. He talked about how he's ready to go. And if he can recapture some of that form where he was a really, really good football player prior to some of those injuries, zapping some of his talent, that's a guy that is more than capable of being the starter opposite Derek Stingley and presents a very fun option with Nelson as depth, or vice versa. Nelson starts and then Griffin is depth. And I do wonder how that one is ultimately going to play out. That's going to be a fun competition to watch. I hope that Steven Nelson has his head on straight and is ready to attack his opportunity here, because if he plays well, I don't know if the Texans would keep him, but it's not out of the question he gets a contract extension or certainly hits free agency next year with an opportunity to be a factor for somebody else. So starting cornerback down, let's move on to the center position. 5 different options to start at center. Okay, really only a handful of options, but there's 5 guys that'll play significant roles in trying to be the center and the depth center for this team. Obviously, Juice Scruggs, the second-round pick who the team traded up to draft this past draft, is a guy that you would love to see just cement the position, take it down, no questions asked about Scruggs being the guy. But this team still has Scott Quessenberry on the roster. He's got starting NFL experience, though he played pretty poor at times last year. Michael Dieter was brought over as a free agent. He's played along the offensive line in Miami and has started and backed up the team. Dieter's also a factor for that left guard spot if Kenyon Green's not ready to go. Jimmy Morrissey is still on this team. He's been around the organization in the atmosphere of the center position for a little over a season now. And Jared Patterson, another rookie that the organization drafted this past draft. So 5 guys. Here's the tough part about the center spot. I would say that training camp and the preseason games and the joint practices, that probably amounts to 2 games worth of real snaps to find out about an offensive lineman, 2 games of actual game type action to find out about these centers between the preseason games, between the joint practices when the Miami Dolphins come to town or when the New Orleans Saints host the Texans for joint practices, and then the padded practices that the team has. There's not a lot of time to figure out exactly who the center is. So if you're dominant in the opportunities that you have here in training camp, you can lock down that center spot with ease. I'm rooting for Juice Scruggs. It'd be good for the organization to hit on that draft pick and have that guy turn into a starter from day one and play really well. I don't have a lot of confidence in the depth behind Scruggs, so that's what I'm hoping for with this center position. The linebacker position is going to be a fascinating one. Look, Christian Harris, to me, is absolutely a starter at linebacker. This is the prototype. This is the new type of NFL linebacker that we're going to see under DeMeco Ryans. I'm excited to watch Harris. He played pretty well last season, and linebackers are going to have that DeMeco Ryans rub. You know, in wrestling, when a superstar wrestles a lesser guy, it's called giving that guy a rub. Save your jokes, okay? Leave them in the comments. Okay, hopefully they don't violate YouTube guidelines. But the DeMeco Ryans factor with linebackers is going to expect all of the potential to be drawn out of all these players and to be maximized, because DeMeco was a fantastic linebacker in his own right, and he did a great job in San Francisco with the various linebackers that they had. So when you factor all those things in, the best version of Christian Harris is the expectation on the field. I believe he's absolutely one of the starters for this team. Denzel Perryman, healthy and playing like his 2021 self, which was a Pro Bowler, he's absolutely a starter. And then, who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. That's why we have training camp. That's why they go out there and practice for all these weeks, have the preseason games. This team signed Corey Littleton in free agency. Christian Kirksey's back for this team. He was here last year, played a prominent role in the front seven. Blake Cashman and Jake Hansen are depth pieces that were a part of last year's team, also have some special teams usage to them. Garrett Wallow is still with this organization, and rookie Henry To'o is also a factor here. I don't know if we can for sure say there's going to be 3 starting linebackers and 4 starting defensive linemen, because you just don't play that much base very often in the NFL anymore. So with that, maybe only 2 starting linebackers is what you ultimately think about in the long term, but something to pay attention to, because this linebacker pecking order is going to be figured out here in training camp, and I'm excited to see what DeMeco Ryans does as the head coach, and then the coaches that are coaching his old position as well. Tight end 2. All right, Dalton Schultz is tight end 1. That one's easy. That one's obvious. But when Dalton Schultz takes a step out and plays that slot wide receiver position, we talked about that a moment ago. When he steps out to play slot wide receiver, is there another tight end that's coming into his spot? Or when they go 2 tight end sets in this offense, who's the other tight end? Who do you trust to be that guy? I would look to see if there's maybe a veteran option just to take a little bit of pressure off of Tegan Quateriano and Brevin Jordan as the other guys. Well, it'd take pressure off them as tight end 2. It would add pressure to them making this team. I think a veteran that is just a tight end, because obviously Andrew Beck is on this team. Beck's got tight end usefulness to him, but he's also probably going to play a little fullback for this team. He was brought over as a free agent. So Andrew Beck and Dalton Schultz are for sure tight ends, but I wouldn't say Beck is for sure tight end number 2. That's where Brevin Jordan, Tegan Quateriano come in. Brevin Jordan's got to show something. Had a disappointing season last year, didn't take that step that a lot of us expected, myself included, for Brevin Jordan. And then for Quateriano, seeing him in minicamp, he looks like he's trimmed up. Looks like he lost a little bit of his baby fat, so to speak, that rookie fat that sometimes guys need to get in the building, get with the strength and conditioning calf, transform their bodies. The athleticism's there for Quateriano. The size is there for Quateriano. Let's see what he can do with the opportunities that he's going to have in training camp. He doesn't have to beat out a ton of guys to A, make the roster, and B, be tight end 2. So Quateriano is my favorite for this, but let's see how it plays out here in training camp. And lastly, kick and punt return. Okay? Kicks and punt returns. I have a sneaky suspicion this is going to be Tank Dell and Desmond King battling this out. I understand there's a handful of players here or there that can do some returning, but Tank Dell was really solid with returns in college. Desmond King was really solid last year with some of his returns. They can battle it out for the punt return situation, and kick returner is important. I don't want to say that any part of this team, any of the 53-man roster and then the active game day players isn't important. Kick returner is important, but the importance in the grand scheme of things has dropped over the years as the NFL has kind of taken the pizzazz out of the kickoff. Desmond King and Tank Dell don't have a ton of kick return experience in their time. Tank Dell did it a couple of years ago at but I wouldn't expect it to be too difficult of a situation to figure out who the kick returner is. I'm intrigued by the punt returner because, again, King looked pretty good last year. In fact, he was 10th in yards per return among all returners that had at least 20 returns on the season. So that's pretty good. The 10th best punt returner in the league, that's pretty solid. And then Tank Dell, he's dynamic. We talked about the quickness when we were talking about slot wide receivers, and that's a guy that can make an impact. We know he's going to be on the roster. He's a 3rd-round pick. He may not play slot wide receiver right away. He may have some very unique packages for him, but this is a way that he can impact the team right away. All right, that's 7 position battles to pay attention to as Texans training camp gets going. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have a comment, a disagreement, or if you want to tell me who you believe is going to win these position battles, the comments are down below. Get in there. The comment section is active. We also have the comment section active at Houston Football. HOUfootball.com is where you can find my website. It has a written description of this very conversation that we had, as well as so many other things on HOUfootball.com. I'd encourage you to check that out as well. I'd appreciate a subscription, a like, and definitely a share. If you enjoyed this video, tell a friend, tell an enemy, tell an acquaintance, send this to your boss, and maybe you'll get some brownie points. Okay, but don't send it to your boss. Don't do that. We have so much fun stuff planned for this channel. People like you who are watching all the way to the end here are the reason this channel can go on, cover the Houston Texans the way that I want to cover the Houston Texans, the way that I feel like Texans fans need the Texans covered. Thank you for watching. Appreciate the time. Please follow me on Twitter at Cody_Stoots. You can also find me, again, HOUfootball.com is where you can find all the writing. And this YouTube channel is going to be active, so active. We're so excited for the Texans season to be here. I'm excited for you watching. I'm excited for you interacting with the video. Thank you so much. And until we see you again, good evening. Good night. We'll work on the finish here, okay? We'll work on how we finish this videos. Maybe we just throw up a title screen here, okay? HOUfootball.com, Houston Football, bing, bang, boom. That's how we'll do it.